How does a $170 stock get sold for $2 in a deal that values an entire 85-year-old Wall Street bank for less than its own headquarters? This is the story of how a name that felt permanent vanished in a single panicked weekend. In January of 2007, things felt permanent. Bear Stearns stock was trading around $171 a share. Its gleaming headquarters at 383 Madison Avenue, opened just 5 years earlier, was a monument to its success, valued at over $1 billion. Inside, 14,000 employees operated one of Wall Street's oldest and most aggressive firms. The culture was famously, "Eat what you kill." It was a place for street fighters, not theorists. The firm's legendary chief, Jimmy Kane, a world-class bridge player with a cigar often in hand, embodied this swagger. He had led the firm for decades, fostering a culture where big bets were rewarded and risk-takers were heroes. On the trading floor, the daily profit and loss statement was the only thing that mattered. It was a formula that had worked for generations, building a firm that seemed as solid as the granite under Manhattan. The engine that powered this confidence was mortgages. By 2006, Bear Stearns had become a dominant force in turning American home loans into complex bonds. They would buy up thousands of mortgages, slice them into pieces with different levels of risk, and sell those pieces to investors around the world. These were called mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations. It sounded complicated, but the premise was simple. Housing prices only go up. Ratings agencies stamped these bonds with AAA ratings, the highest mark of safety. For Bear, every deal was a gusher of fees. It was a machine that seemed to print money, transforming the mundane paperwork of home ownership into high finance and making the firm a fortune. That machine was supercharged by leverage. By 2007, the firm was leveraged around 33 to 1. For every dollar of its own money, it had borrowed 33 more. This magnified every win, turning small profits into huge returns. But it also magnified every loss. In a culture obsessed with the daily P&L, risk management was often seen as a roadblock, a cost center that got in the way of making money. The firm's own risk models, like value at risk, suggested that any potential daily loss was manageable. These models were built on historical data, on a past where things had always reverted to normal. They were great at measuring ripples, but completely blind to the possibility of a tidal wave. Permanence felt real because the math said it was. The first crack in that permanence appeared in the summer of 2007. Two of Bear's own hedge funds, run by managers Ralph Cioffi and Matthew Tannen, imploded spectacularly. Their names sounded safe: the high-grade Structured Credit Strategies Fund and the Enhanced Leverage Fund. But they were stuffed with the riskiest slices of subprime mortgage bonds. As the housing market began to cool, these bonds became impossible to sell. The fund's lenders demanded more cash, and there was none. In June, Bear Stearns orchestrated a $3.2 billion bailout for one of the funds, own balance sheet directly to the toxic assets it had created. It was a shocking move. The rescue failed. By July, both funds had collapsed, wiping out investor money and prompting a wave of lawsuits. For the first time, Wall Street looked at Bear Stearns and wondered, do they actually know what they own? The hedge fund disaster put a serious dent in Bear's reputation, and its leadership came under fire. Stories circulated that CEO Jimmy Kane had been away at a bridge tournament, out of touch, during the critical days of the crisis. Whether true or not, the narrative stuck. The street fighter seemed distracted. The whisper network on Wall Street, which moves faster than any newswire, began to paint a picture of a firm whose leadership was asleep at the wheel. The pressure mounted, and in January 2008, Kane stepped aside as CEO, retaining the title of chairman. His replacement, Alan Schwartz, was a respected dealmaker, but he was inheriting a firm that was already taking on water, with its reputation for risk management in tatters. Underneath the leadership drama was a quieter, more dangerous problem. Bear Stearns was completely dependent on overnight funding. Every single day, the firm had to borrow tens of billions of dollars in the repo market to fund its operations. This is how modern finance works. You post your bonds as collateral, you get cash for 24 hours, and you do it all again the next day. It's like needing a new home loan every morning just to stay in your house. The system works perfectly as long as everyone believes you're good for the money. But as fear spread about Bear's mortgage holdings, lenders started demanding a bigger cushion. They'd lend you 95 cents on the dollar instead of 98. It sounds small, but when you're leveraged 33 to 1 and borrowing billions, that small change drains your cash reserves at lightning speed. The pressure built all through the winter. And then came the week of March 10th, 2008. The whispers grew into a roar. On Monday, Moody's rating agency downgraded 16 of Bear's mortgage-backed securities. The market took note. The cost to insure Bear's debt, measured by credit default swaps, began to skyrocket. By midweek, it was trading at levels that implied a serious risk of default. This was the market shouting that it had lost faith. Quietly at first, then with more urgency, clients at Bear's prime brokerage unit, the part of the bank that services hedge funds, started pulling their cash and moving their accounts to rivals. No one wanted to be the last one out the door. The assets were literally walking away. On Wednesday, March 12th, with rumors swirling that Bear was in trouble, CEO Alan Schwartz went on television to stop the bleeding. He was calm, collected, and direct. He told the world that Bear's liquidity position was strong, that they had a cushion of $17 billion, and that the firm was not in crisis. He said, "We don't see any pressure on our liquidity, let alone a liquidity crisis." The intention was to project confidence. The effect was the opposite. For nervous lenders and clients, a CEO having to publicly deny a crisis is the biggest red flag there is. The interview was meant to be a fire extinguisher. Instead, it was like throwing gasoline on the embers of market fear. Thursday, March 13th, was the day the floor fell out. The reassurance on television had failed. The bank run began in earnest, but this was a modern bank run, with no lines of people outside a branch. It happened silently, through phone calls and keystrokes. Repo lenders, who had provided billions the day before, simply said no when Bear asked to roll the funding for another day. Major clearing banks, which process trades, demanded more collateral and tightened their terms. Hedge funds accelerated their withdrawals, pulling billions from their prime brokerage accounts. Inside 383 Madison, executives watched in horror as their cash reserves evaporated hour by hour. They started the day with billions. By the end, they were staring into an abyss. The firm was not yet insolvent on paper, but it was out of cash. And without cash, it could not open for business the next day. By Friday morning, March 14th, there was only one option left. Bear Stearns made a call to the Federal Reserve. The private crisis was now a public emergency. The Fed, working through JPMorgan Chase, invoked a rarely used emergency power to provide an overnight loan, just to keep Bear's lights on until the closing bell. It was a stunning intervention. The message was clear. The government feared that if Bear Stearns went down, it could take the entire financial system with it. But the loan was just a bandage. It bought one business day. Over the weekend, a permanent solution had to be found. Bear Stearns had to be sold, or it would be allowed to fail when markets opened in Asia on Sunday night. The weekend of March 15th and 16th became a frantic race against the clock. Meetings were held at the headquarters of the New York Federal Reserve, a scene that echoed the 1998 bailout of long-term capital management. But this time, Bear wasn't one of the rescuers. It was the patient on the operating table. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke made it clear that no public money would be used to save Bear's shareholders. A private sector solution was the only way. They pressured JPMorgan's CEO, Jamie Dimon, to buy the failing firm. Dimon was reluctant, but the threat of systemic collapse was a powerful motivator. By Sunday, with Asian markets just hours from opening, the outlines of a deal were forced into place. The deal that emerged on Sunday night was a shocker. JPMorgan agreed to buy Bear Stearns for $2 per share. The entire company, with its 85-year history and its billion-dollar headquarters, was valued at just $236 million. It was a humiliating fire sale price, but the only thing that made the deal possible was a massive backstop from the U.S. government. The Fed agreed to create a special entity, named Maiden Lane, to absorb $30 billion of Bear's most toxic, unsellable mortgage assets. JPMorgan would be responsible for the first $1 billion in losses. The American taxpayer would be on the hook for the other $29 billion. In essence, JPMorgan was buying the healthy parts of the business, the people and the building, while the Fed quarantined the disease. The $2 offer was seen as an insult, not just by Bear employees, but by its shareholders. It was so low, it felt predatory. The outrage was immediate. There was a real risk that shareholders would reject the deal, leaving the Fed with a bankrupt investment bank on Monday morning and triggering the very panic they were trying to avoid. A week later, to ensure the deal closed and to quiet the legal threats, JPMorgan raised its offer to $10 a share. It was a five-fold increase, but it was a hollow victory. The extra money didn't change the reality. The firm was gone. The franchise had been shattered in a matter of days. Shareholders approved the $10 deal on May 29th, and it closed in June. The name Bear Stearns was removed from 383 Madison. The integration into JPMorgan began, and thousands of jobs were eliminated. An entire culture, built over 85 years, was dismantled and scattered. Some found it ironic that Bear, which had famously refused to contribute to the Wall Street bailout of LTCM in 1998, found so few friends willing to help in its own moment of crisis. That same weekend, the Fed created a new emergency lending program for all investment banks, a bridge built in a hurry over a chasm no one had wanted to admit existed. Later, the two hedge fund managers, Cioffi and Tannen, were acquitted of fraud, cementing the idea that Bear's collapse wasn't a story of simple crime, but of a systemic failure of risk, leverage, and, most of all, confidence. The joke that JPMorgan bought a building for $200 million and got a bank for free stuck because it captured a profound truth. In a liquidity crisis, fixed assets are worthless. A billion-dollar skyscraper is just a number on a page. You can't use a lobby to pay back your overnight loans. Cash is the only thing that matters. The story of Bear Stearns is a fall that took 14 months from its peak stock price, but the final collapse took less than 100 hours. It was a stark reminder that on Wall Street, you can spend 85 years building a reputation and lose it between a Thursday afternoon and a Sunday night. Here is the final lesson. Leverage makes you look like a genius until your lenders get nervous. Your risk models look perfect until the day they don't. And you can't book confidence as an asset on your balance sheet, even though its sudden withdrawal is the most lethal liability of all. Ambition built a tower. Money moved overnight. And human nature, when it panics, runs for the exits. That is how an 85-year-old name disappeared. If you're into modern business stories like this, subscribe and stick around. We dig into peaks, cracks, unravelings, and what they say about money and people. See you next time.